Michele Neylon is the CEO of Blacknight. Rafael Laguna, CEO of Open-Xchange, right there. Okay. Mohan, Executive Vice President and CTO at Afilias, also the chair of the Universal Acceptance Steering Group. And Mockapetris, the inventor of the Internet Domain Name System, DNS. Thanks. Lars, Steffen, and I are your moderators for this evening. Lars, come on up here. We are going to try to engage you guys. Hopefully you'll have questions, and Lars is going to roam the audience, and well, you're going to have a mic. Yes. They're getting Lars a mic, and he's going to roam the audience, and hopefully you guys will be a part of this conversation. So thanks to Lars for being out there handling the crowd. Thank you so much for joining us today. I think this is going to be a very exciting topic. Well, on the face of it, it doesn't seem like one. But we've got a really cool panel. We've got a really cool panel that I think is going to have some interesting things to say. I think we all understand the concept of trying to figure out where your next billion with a B customers come from, but nobody really knows much about what universal acceptance is. And I would like to start us out by asking Mohan to explain a little bit about what we're talking about with universal acceptance in the context of telling a story of .info.
Sure. So 2001, my company Afilias started up .info, and we thought it was the coolest thing since sliced bread, right? And we had great pickup in the marketplace at that time, and we had a few 100,000 folks who came up and bought .info domain names. And we were a 3-person startup company. I was employee number 2 in the company. And literally about 3 or 4 weeks after we started selling domain names and selling .info top-level domains, we had our phones just ringing off the hook. My emails got clogged with folks saying, I can't use this thing anywhere. I can't even register for an account. At that time, Yahoo Instant Messenger was extremely popular, and folks are saying, I can't sign up for Yahoo because I'm typing in my email address .info, and it's not working. In fact, it's coming back with a message that says, are you sure you don't mean this name at info.com, right? And my job was to help figure out what to do. So I looked up all these big companies, the names of their CTOs and the names of the CEOs, and I tried to reach them. I tried to send emails to them and letters to them and try to reach them. Couldn't get anywhere with anybody because I was a small startup company and these were very big companies. So eventually, out of a move born out of sheer desperation and out of, you're a startup company, how do you make something happen? I created the office of the CTO, which is really me. And what I ended up doing was writing a letter that talked about the fact that .info was now a legitimate top-level domain that had been accepted on the internet, that was used, that had hundreds of thousands of people who were actually using it and who had bought the names and were intended to use it, and that your company is no longer supporting that. Your company has old, outdated code that says that a valid domain name or a valid email address only ends in 2 or 3 characters, right? But what I did to get the attention of these CIOs and CTOs, I put the letter on letterhead. We didn't have a letterhead at that time, so I created one, put it on the letterhead, signed it, and stuck it in a FedEx envelope. And I sent it via FedEx to the top 100 companies that had the most amount of traffic on the internet at that time. And I asked them to, I sent it to the secretaries of the CTOs, the CIOs, asked them to contact my secretary, which at that time happened to be the CEO of the company, because we were a 3-person company, right? And guess what? We had something like a 70% call rate coming back, because the envelopes actually hit the desks of the decision makers, right? But I tell the story much more to explain the fact that in 2001, .info, which came to life, 2001, it was not accepted in lots of places. And in 2017, there was somebody who came to me just a few weeks ago and said they wrote an email to, there's an association that, nonprofit that works on internationalized domain names called Unicode, right? They sent an email with the .info address to Unicode, and it came back and said, be rejected, right? So the problem really with universal acceptance is you've got domain names, you've got customers of yours who are buying these domain names and who intend to use them. They're using them for email, they're putting up websites, and you got browsers, operating systems, you have mail servers that say, forget about it, right? I don't even recognize this. The only things I recognize are names that have 2 or 3 characters in length, and in many cases that are only in ASCII.
So, and now, so there are well over 1,000 domain names in the same situation as .info is.
Yeah, and Christian, it's over 1,000 names, and there's a whole bunch of names that are now, when you look at it, they actually are written right to left. They're in Arabic, they're in Chinese, they're in Hindi, right? And you have systems that don't know what to do with it.
Okay, so we've got a multilingual set of names in the DNS. It's a very rich and diverse field, probably more than was ever thought of when things started.
Well, I kind of believed in just arbitrary octets or bytes. So, no.
Okay. So is what we're talking about today, what we're starting to talking about, is it a design flaw in the system?
No, it's always been an issue that people have changed the definition of what's legal. I mean, you can go and talk to the people from 3M Company and 3Com. When they wanted to get their domain names, they didn't want it to be THREE whatever. They wanted it to be a 3. And all these people said, no, domain names cannot start with a number. And there's nothing in the specification to forbid it. And it always has been legal. But even if you look at, dare I say it, the ICANN documentation, they won't tell you exactly what the legal TLD names are in a consistent way. So we've always been putting artificial restrictions on things, and the entrepreneurs have been expanding the scope while the regulators have been sort of trying to keep up. I think one of the questions is, what's the right answer, okay? If what we could do is get everybody to fix their software tomorrow because FedEx decided to help you out, a FedEx for every endpoint. But at any rate, what would you say is the right answer, and who gets to, specify that?
That's a good question. Okay, guys, so we've did a little bit of an overview of what we mean when we say universal acceptance. It's on the big sign up there. But I want to reel this back a little bit more, and maybe this will give you an opportunity, each panelist, to give a little perspective on who you are and why you're up here. I want a broader question of what you think the barriers that the next billion users will face as they come online. Blake, what do you think?
Shit, I don't know. No, so I think to look at the next billion users, you have to look at the last billion users. The last billion users didn't come online because .com was easily obtained or pervasive, or an issue because the 1001 TLDs we've rolled out over the last 3 years or so are now accessible, even though they're not universally accessible. The last billion users that came online in closed ecosystems like Facebook, like Tencent, like Alipay, on WeChat. There are 4 or 5 massive ecosystems that are putting up numbers of 1.5 billion users with trillions of minutes that are taking up most of internet's bandwidth. So I think if you raise the question up to what are the barriers to the next billion users coming on, the barriers are actually more economic in nature. They're more infrastructure, and when I say infrastructure, it's about who has power, who has connectivity, universal connectivity that is affordable, who has education to actually figure out how to use those things. because there's a pretty big divide between folks that are academically and financially advantaged that are on the internet and those that are not. You can look at continents like India, Africa, the Middle East, where there are lots of folks that just don't have accessibility. And I think those are some of the key issues, besides getting down into this issue, which is, I think universal acceptance and universal awareness are two things that kind of go hand in hand, and most folks aren't even aware that this is an issue yet, developers too. So I think the next billion are going to come on through that, and I think whether it's IDN, whether it's Unicode or Punycode or whatever, I think that there's going to be a lot of small businesses who really want to represent themselves, or people that have ideas, which are the folks that have been buying the 270 million domain names that are actually registered today, that want to be able to do it in their local language because they usually do business with people that are in their backyard or down the street or in the local community. So I think in that respect, it's important. I don't think it's 1 billion people. If you think about how long domains have been there, and there's only 270 million that have been registered so far, so it'll be very interesting to see how those next billion come on.
Thank you. Michele?
It's a hard act to follow. I think the next billion, it is a hard one to call. I mean, I think you're going to see a lot of them are going to come on through mobile. I mean, that's where we're seeing growth. Everybody's on their mobiles. I mean, you're seeing people just living their life on mobile. I see people talking on Facebook, and the questions they have, if you're using desktop, you wouldn't have them because it's not an issue. But on mobile, it's like, how do I do this with my thumb? How can I copy and paste this in? How can I upload that image, read that document, answer that complex email? And the infrastructure is obviously an issue. I mean, if you're having problems getting clean drinking water, getting online is not a high priority. I mean, I think it's very easy for those of us in this kind of tech bubble to talk about, the big challenges for the next billion users, whereas I think in some cases you think, okay, well, hold on, how about we actually focus a little bit more on helping fix some of those problems first? The big barriers that we're still talking in jargon. I mean, the talk tonight is about universal acceptance. I mean, what the hell is that? You're talking about IDNs. I mean, how many people in the room even here know what an IDN is? What's EAI and why do you care? What's Unicode? Does my mother care? No, she doesn't give a damn. She just wants to be able to sign up online, use a service, and get on with her life. And that's what we want to be striving towards, I suppose, making things simpler, easier. I mean, as Blake says, I mean, being able to get yourself online in whatever way is comfortable for you. And if that's getting a simple web presence, or if that's being able to write an email in your native language, well, that's cool.
Rafael, how about you?
Being a European, we're still suffering from the 5 bits we got from the yellow telex tape, because that was 5 bits, right? And so you got the ANSI characters and plus, minus, and full stop, I think, and a 0. In a way, we're still sort of from learned behavior. At least we as Germans, we have these funny umlauts, with the dots and stuff, right? We're still suffering from that because whenever you try to use them anywhere, you're going to screw up for sure. Something is going to go wrong because most of the technology, even in core IT, and I'm not talking domain names, right, doesn't really know how to deal with that. So if you ask me, when are we going to have this fixed? And we're developing one of the best domain name servers, Power DNS, one of the biggest email servers. We run 72% of all IMAP, right? Dovecot. We should fix that, right? Why are we not? Because there is no huge business, right? If an Indian company would approach us saying, hey, I'm Reliant Jio, I'm just screwing up all mobile in India right now. We have 100 million users, here's a few $1 million, fix it for me. We would, that's what gets us moving. But really, when you look at the industry, we're still using funny keyboards whose layout is from back in the mechanical typewriter times. You know that, right? Do you? The QWERTY or Z, quirky, the quirky keyboards. That's how long these innovation cycles are when it comes to learned behavior. Now, where's the next $1 billion? I think, to be honest, and don't shoot me, it's probably going to be elsewhere than universal acceptance. It will permeate in like accessibility does into applications. And you know why we as an application maker care about this? Because it's a law in the US, for example. if you put out an application as a telco, it has to be accessible for blind people or people with disabilities. So they're saying, we're not going to buy from you, Rafael, unless you have that. So guess what? It gets on my roadmap, we fix it, it's there, right? So if that happens, it's going to be there. If it's not, if there's no economical incentive, it's not going to happen. Now, where's the next $1 billion, though? I think domain names are totally undervalued for many, many reasons. And I think there are many additional ways to sell millions and millions of domain names. Like, for example, we as an email company, we know very well that email is a great online identity. You all know that, right? You're using your email ID to even sign up with Facebook, right? Or anybody else. Now, why not make the domain name one that you could own? You came up with, a principle that I totally admire, which is to distribute responsibility to many people, to federate responsibility, to not create a silo. That's DNS, right? That's one of the super clever things that this gentleman over here came up with many, many suns ago, right? And it is still working. This is what makes the internet tick. This is what keeps the internet open and accessible for everyone. Now, if the domain names now become your ID, your passport on the internet, wouldn't that be great? Because it is federated, not controlled by one. It's not logged in with Facebook. It's not logged in with Google, but it's logged in with your own name you can buy from Blake or anybody else, right? Isn't that great? That's what I would really, what? You like that? Oh, Michele, by the way.
I don't like how we're buying from him. I mean, we do compete. Come on.
Are you? Are you really? No, you're not. Not in Ireland, I'm sure.
So I'm still very interested in hearing what Ram and Paul have to say about the question of what the barriers to the next billion people coming online are. But I did want to respond to one thing. I wanted to tease something that the Universal Acceptance Steering Group is working on right now. That group, which Ram is the chair of, is working on a white paper right now that's going to be released later on this year. Based on the methodology of this white paper, they looked at the possibility of if these universal acceptance issues were fixed overnight, what the market potential is in two markets. They looked at Russian and Chinese domain names, and they used various methodologies to figure out that they're looking at adding approximately 7 million new users if this stuff was more accessible, which would translate to approximately US dollars $2.4 billion per year. So we are looking at, if this methodology is tried and true, something that has a real market potential if we can crack this nut. I wanted to throw that out there to the group, that there is a potential for real market, for real revenue coming out of this.
Yeah, if I may pick this one up. If it's in China, it's not going to translate into dollars for you, for sure. It's going to translate into dollars for Chinese companies, so we can dream of that. India different? Maybe?
It is different?
It is different, but it's deducted by 10. The ARPU is much, much lower than it is in what we're used to. So quite frankly, I wouldn't dream of that. I think it's going to happen really seriously if some countries just say, hey, we're not going to deal with this anymore. You have to support our languages, and it doesn't need to be China. It can be any other country outside the US, because we all have funny letters, right?
We all have funny letters.
We have funny letters, and there's different levels of complexity. Right to left is probably the hardest you can get. Don't dream of these things. The numbers look great in a spreadsheet, but in reality, that's not going to happen.
So I think part of the problem here is that we are all assuming that the primary way of interacting with our devices is going to stay the same, and that's not the case anymore, right? Voice is becoming a significant new factor, and I think that has a potential to be transformative for languages and for folks who do not have the literacy to go take a keyboard that is in English and then has 5 overlays on it, right? If you try to do this in any Indian language, it's a real pain in the butt, because it's very hard to type stuff in, okay, on any device today. But if you can simply speak into it and it understands, and it's with some level of machine learning, whatever, it's able to convert that, then I think that opens up email, that opens up domain names in a way that I think is tremendously transformative. And I don't think we've seen anything close to what the potential of that is. Now, The problem underlying that is, okay, you've solved the first layer, which is input, right? How do you get devices to recognize the domain names or the email addresses? The question is, will that translate across the internet? Will it actually have fidelity? If I have an email that's in Hindi and I send it across to Blake and it gets to him, I more or less am certain that his spam filter is going to sit there and say that's junk and just trash it, right? And that's a fundamental, that's another kind of a problem that has to be resolved.
It's interesting that you talk about assumptions that we're making up here on stage. I guess one other assumption is that the DNS itself is going to stay relevant. Paul, is it?
I was kind of curious about one thing. You said we were going to add 7 million or billion new users.
7.2 million potential
Well, that's
new
not that many.
addresses.
7 million users, so what? Drop in a bucket, and 7 billion, we don't have the bodies. So I was having trouble with it either way.
One was domain names, one was dollars. Sorry about that.
Yeah, I mean, one of the questions I think is whether or not we can make a domain name be valuable as an identifier in a larger sense than today, or whether it's going to decay. Because I think that, all technology tends to decay. So unless you figure out some way to evolve it into a new role, then it'll decay. And there will be something past DNS. I think the real question is, if we enable these things, will they come? If I talk to the other end, not the consumer end, if I talk to a business and say, hey, in order to be on the internet, in order to have universal sellability of your product, if I'm an ice cream manufacturer and I want to sell around the world, how many different domain names do I need to do that? And will my sales go up if I have internationalized domain names, or is Ben & Jerry's good enough for it? I'm sorry.
One quick thing. My friend Lars here is getting lonely here, and I really would love this to be a conversation between all of us. If there are questions in the room, I would love to hear them.
So they're supposed to go get Lars, huh?
Yeah, they're supposed to go. Well, Lars.
We can't force them, so.
We'll keep going.
Christian, just to carry on from what Paul's saying here, there's some new stuff going on, right? Blake, maybe you've seen it, or Michele, you've seen it, where there's emojis, and there's this supposed demand for emoji domain names, right? And that's an interesting thing, because that falls right into what Mockapetris here was saying. You've got something that says that this is what's legal, and then you have the world saying, hey, I'm communicating using a different medium now, and I demand and I expect that that medium be available online, and I can express myself online, right? To me, that's a pretty clear example of the importance of universal acceptance at the infrastructure level. Because what's the point of having an emoji domain name, supposing it was even legal, if it wouldn't work?
Okay, so a lot of the companies in this space are infrastructure companies. How many of them, either on stage or in the audience, are universal acceptance ready?
I'd have to ask my CTO.
Okay, so you don't know.
Where is my CTO? He's back there somewhere hiding.
But, honestly, that doesn't matter.
Okay,
Because
why does that matter?
No, because if everything, and we're not, but if everything that we had in our platform today was universally acceptable, right? And we still have to scale on the internet. We still have to get to other players, and it's an interoperability question, which means that everybody in the ecosystem, and if you compared it to IPv6, if you remember, it's got to be 6 years ago when we had IPv6 Day, where we actually had a bunch of players, both Yahoo and Microsoft and Google, and a bunch of the big companies basically said, we're going to turn everything on IPv6, and we're just going to see if this shit works, right? And it did, and it worked, but not everybody's there, and still, a lot of the infrastructure that's on the web today is not IPv6 enabled, because people do not replace, routers that are fully functional and can't be upgraded with software. They don't replace it because they're supposed to be IPv6 ready, because that costs money and infrastructure costs money. And I think if you if you went back to email when we had some pretty bad spam problems, and I think that there was a couple of big companies, again, the same that I mentioned was Microsoft, Google, Yahoo, a couple of other big ones, got together and said, hey, we're going to put together some sort of universal capability of our interoperable systems to be able to filter and identify whether a mail came from the person that was marked in by that domain. Everybody said, yeah, that makes a total lot of sense. Let's just go do it because the economics make sense. And right now, it's not clear that in the domain name business generally, that the economics for extended TLDs, for IDNs, et cetera, are actually making sense. .com still sells at a premium. Or I should say, still trades at a premium in the aftermarket. Yet, when you go buy a new TLD, and I sell all these things, when you buy a new TLD, the price for a new TLD is usually considerably higher than a .com that's never been claimed and isn't in the aftermarket again. And that economic inversion is actually, I think, doing more to slow the growth of TLDs. And there was a recent registry that just increased prices by 3,000% in 1 year because they didn't like the way the economics were working out. And if you think about that, that's going to do more to slow the growth of TLDs, even if we actually get to a place where we have universal capability to accept IDNs and Unicode, et cetera, and be able to map the scenario you just said, so I don't take something that's coming in an Indian language and sticking it in spam.
I think this is one of the great questions, is that if we take a look at these new TLDs, should I be thinking about accepting them on the basis of merit? In my day job, what we do is security, and one of the things we do is we do blacklists of domain names that you don't want to talk to. And there are people that come to us and they say, well, we want to wild card this TLD. All right? So I know that you guys probably don't like that idea because
Whole TLDs, yeah.
people that own TLDs and want to sell them. But you know, our customers come to us and they say, well, just, you know, blacklist this whole TLD, Paul. It's bad, and I'm going to convince you. And I always say to them, I tell you what, I have a great solution. We allow customers to have their custom list that they add on to, and you can add this TLD to it, and we'll let you wildcard it. And they say, well, why don't you just do it for all of your customers? They go, I don't want to get sued, that's why. Okay. But, I mean, do you think that there's any way to think about whether or not we should be thinking about ranking different TLDs, or are they all going to be treated equally forever?
They aren't. I mean, some are more trustworthy than others. I mean, if you look at some of the new TLDs, like you got .bank or .pharmacy, I mean, they're super validated, and you know that to get one of those domains, you've had to pass through multiple layers of checks and background checks and corporate documents, and there's all sorts of crazy.
Yeah, there's all these banks that also got their own TLDs as well as registering under .bank. Does that
Sure,
help?
but they're not even
Does
using
that help
them.
us out?
Well, no, but I mean, the ranking thing, I mean, there's some registry people here in the room, and they'd probably hate it if I was to say yes, but in some ways, yeah. I mean, some TLDs are a cesspool. They're crap. The registry sells the domains for a couple of cents. Every spammer and his friend goes off and buys hundreds, if not thousands, of the domains, uses them to send malware, spam, and other crud onto the internet. So obviously you're going to end up blocking them. It makes perfect sense to me. And if you're running big mail systems like a lot of us are, you have to defend yourself. You can't, I mean, I don't know how many million emails we process per hour, but it keeps on growing, and like 90+% of it is crap.
But that is not the universal acceptance problem. That's a different problem altogether, right? That's a normal marketplace dynamics issue, right? And I think that's actually a legitimate issue, right? If you have a domain name that is used in a really nasty way, then you ought to be able to protect yourself from it. I think that's entirely legitimate. The problem is when you have a .bank, right, which is heavily vetted and you know for sure it's coming from a bank, and it can't get through to the other side. Somebody who sends an email from the bank can't get the emails across the infrastructure, right? Or you put a, whatever name.bank as a website, and on the browser, it says, I don't recognize this. Are you sure you want to go there? This is not secure, right? How many people dare to go click on the advanced and say, I'll take the risk, right? So I think that is the underlying problem. And from my perspective, we've got to solve that anyway. If we wait for it to happen through osmosis, it just takes forever.
So I'm just going to build on that just for a quick second. So I kind of kept bubbling up to economics and so we are 1,000% behind. Universal acceptance. We're on the group. Rich Merdinger at GoDaddy, vice chairs the group, and we know technically that it has to be solved, or we're going to disadvantage a lot of small businesses globally, and entrepreneurs and people that are trying to figure out how to become their own thing and get the best possible identifier in the internet that they can. So we're totally behind it, and I'm agreeing with you completely that technical problem needs to get solved. This is a great place to talk because we've got a bunch of tech people here. I think there's other economic problems that we've talked about as well that kind of go hand in hand with it to really explode it into the question, which is where the next billion users come from. But if we don't solve the problem, the technical problem, it's not going to matter whether the economics get solved or not.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. The next billion users will just choke if you don't solve the infrastructure problems underneath, right? This is what you find in non-technical fields. You have cities that experience mega growth and the core infrastructure doesn't keep up, and you have problems with water, with roads, with sewers and stuff like that, right? And in some ways, this is a similar type of an issue. It's below the surface.
I think DNS can carry a few more billion domain names. That's not going to be a problem. I also think that most of the new domain names are well supported all over the place because there's enough business interest behind it. Universal acceptance, of course, goes much further, right, and asks for much more. And we're not going to see much of that happening anytime soon, in my mind, unless there is a commercial incentive to do that.
Well, let's talk about commercial incentives, and let's try to put it in the focus of web hosting, because we're at World Hosting Days. We talked about how a lot of the problem is interoperability. And so maybe the answer is no, and maybe that's fine. But is there a market differentiator for somebody to be a thought leader in this area and to say, I'm going to go ahead and make sure I am universal have universal acceptance across the board in my systems? Is there a market differentiator? Michele, you sell a lot of these TLDs, these new TLDs.
We offer a lot of these new TLDs for sale. We don't sell many of these new TLDs.
How's the Gaelic language, Michele? Isn't that very different?
Well, no, it's just, sure, look, Blake offers tons of these domains for sale, but he's still selling way more .com, and that's the reality for us at the moment. The demand isn't quite there, and I have to take issue with what you're saying about it all working. It doesn't. I mean, the issue for us is somebody comes to us, small business, buys a domain name, gets hosting, has email, goes to sign up for an online service, and then they can't sign up. The form doesn't accept it, the email bounces, and they're back to us, and it's a customer service issue.
You have to deal with every stupid JavaScript hacker out in the world that has created a form for anything, right? So that this doesn't scale well. It's really hard.
So, the economics of that is it's a crap user experience.
Yeah.
And that's a fundamental issue for us.
So what you going to do now?
I'm just curious, does that matter depending upon whether it's a different alphabet or whether it's still,
It's all of that.
Characters?
More than
all of the above.
Most of them info was four characters, right?
Well, if
Lazy coding, basically.
If nothing else, you've just hit on something useful. If you're out there working in the web hosting or domain industry, and you are not being a leader in getting your own universal acceptance stuff in order, are you giving your customers a crap user experience?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
No question.
So that's a good reason. That's like the first really exciting
How many of your
thing that I've
customers,
heard
Blake?
for the people that are.
I don't know how many customers we've sold millions.
I know, but how many of your customers bump into UA troubles?
I don't hear about it. So we don't get that feedback for us because it's not usually our problem, because they're able to stand up a website on top of the domain, which is the first thing, and then they can actually usually stand up an email. It's just like, what are they going to do with it? Does it show up? Does it get accepted in somebody else's inbox? And then that becomes our problem. And we don't hear very many of those stories today. And to your point, there haven't been we offer a ton for sale. We offer 600 different TLDs for sale now. And we sell a lot more .com still today and .net than we sell anything else. And again, it kind of comes back, I think, largely to some of the economics and pricing, and the pricing that's on those guys.
The pricing is a huge issue. I mean, why would I spend $100 on a glass when I can get at the perfectly good .com for 10?
Well, yeah, and the funny analogy that we've been using is like, so if you had a bunch of real estate, and you only had one continent, there's only so much coastline, and people start buying up all that coastline, which is premium, and then all of a sudden you just created 1,000 new islands out there. Is the price going to go up or down? What should it do? Because now there's a bunch more coastline. And actually, price ought to go down. That's not the way the economics of this whole system is
Dubai tried
working.
that, right, with a flower.
The Palm Island, yeah.
So I want to invite Lars back on stage. Lars and I are both in the comms section of the Universal Acceptance Steering Group. We're trying to drive awareness of universal acceptance so more people take it seriously. We're looking to find web hosting companies that are interested in exploring their own universal acceptance capabilities. To that end, Lars is going to queue up our last question.
Well, we are asking the people on stage and also everybody in the room who feels free to raise his hand for the pledge that we are asking for is, if you are willing to pledge for universal acceptance. And we created a small paragraph which is universal acceptance is the foundational requirement for a truly multilingual internet, one in which users around the world can navigate entirely in local languages. It is also the key to unlocking the potential of new generic top-level domains to foster competition, consumer choice, and innovation in the domain name industry. My organization, if you feel free to raise your hand, seeks to explore ways in which it can achieve universal acceptance. And so we pledge to commit resources in 2017 towards exploring how to ensure that our organization's internet applications and systems treat all TLDs in a consistent manner.
I'm in, but do I have to remember that? No? Okay.
Rafael, we are still missing your hand.
So what was the question again?
So there's a website.
Did we have any more hands in the audience?
I was forced. I guess the real answer is, we were saying, you can only say yes to that question, right? I mean, yeah, in all fairness. But then you have roadmap meetings, right? So next release of our Power DNS, right? We go like, what's the priority? And guess what? If there is no customer requirements, it's going to be priority 3, which means
yes or no would have done.
No, that's not that easy.
Well, we got it now on tape. Thank you.
Hey, you know what is progress? The idea that it's going to make it into roadmap meetings to be cut maybe year 1.
It is.
That's progress.
We have a policy guy. It's in the roadmap meetings. He's going to be voted down for the next, I don't know how many iterations. Sorry to say. Unless Blake tells me otherwise, right?
So I have a question for you while you're in your priority meeting. Would you tell them universal acceptance is more important than, say, DNSSEC?
No. Would you?
I don't run your company.
I would.
So would you?
I personally think that the universal acceptance thing is a little bit like a Steve Jobs problem where you just have to tell people, no, you don't get a floppy diskette interface anymore. And you get rid of a bunch of these stupid notions about how I can have lists of bailiwicks and all these other things, which are what technically prevent a lot of this stuff, and you just say a string that comes down is legal. I mean, it's presumed legal. Because it's really a lot of people that just didn't build the interface in a general way that created the problems that you see as universal acceptance today.
One of the things we're trying to do is make it so that as systems are getting re-engineered, this makes it onto people's radars. So go to UASG.tech if you want more information about this. You can take the pledge at UASG.tech/UA pledge. Grab one of these bottle openers on your way out so that you can remember us. And I think we ought to go ahead and call it and thank our panelists for a great time tonight. Hopefully you can have some more beers out here. Thanks so much.
Thank you.